The bread sat on the windowsill where Nora had put it 2 hours before. It was cooling there in the late afternoon light, and her son Tommy had not taken his eyes off it since she set it down. She had not told him they were waiting. She had not told him much of anything lately, because the words for it were too heavy and she did not know how to carry them and speak them at the same time. But Tommy was 8 years old, and he understood hunger in the particular way that children understand it, which is to say completely, without the soft edges that adults learn to put around hard things. The bread was the last of the flour. She had used it all. There was nothing behind the tin on the shelf except the faint white ghost of what had been there. Nora Calloway stood at the window on the other side of the room and watched the road. Not because she expected anyone. She watched it because standing still without watching something felt like giving up. And she had not done that yet. The town of Hatcher Flat, Wyoming, in the autumn of 1883, was not a place that made room for women in her position. It made room for them when they were useful and overlooked them when they were not. And Nora had crossed from one category to the other on a single Tuesday in March, when her husband Leonard had ridden out to check the north pasture and never come back. They found the horse 3 days later, grazing loose near the creek. They never found Leonard. The ranch had belonged to Leonard in the way that things belonged to men in Hatcher Flat, which was legally and completely. When he died without a will and without a brother, the bank had a word with the county, and the county had a word with Nora, and by June she understood that the house she was standing in belonged to her only until someone decided otherwise. That someone was a man named Archie Foss. She did not think about Archie Foss while she watched the road. Thinking about him used up energy she did not have. She thought instead about the bread on the sill, and about Tommy watching it, and about the fact that there was a man coming down the road from the north on a gray horse, and he was moving at the careful pace of someone who did not want to pass the place he was looking for. He stopped at the gate. He looked at the house for a long moment, then down at something in his hand. Then he looked at the house again. Nora went to the door. The man on the gray horse was perhaps 40, with the kind of face that had been made ordinary by weather. He was not large. He wore a brown coat that had seen better years, and a hat that fit him like it was the only hat he had ever owned. He held a folded paper in one hand and the reins in the other, and he looked at her with no particular expression. She stood in the doorway and waited. "I am looking for the Calloway place. I am told there is a position." There was. 3 weeks ago. I put the notice up 3 weeks ago. I have been riding since Laramie. She looked at him. She looked at the horse, which was thin in the ribs but well tended, the hooves clean, the coat brushed. A man who took care of his horse when times were lean was a man who understood what mattered. I cannot pay wages. I told that to the agency. I said room and board through winter, and a share of whatever the spring brings, if anything does. That is what the notice said, and you rode from Laramie for that. I rode from Laramie for honest work. The wages can wait. She looked at him a moment longer. There was something in the way he held himself on the horse, not proud exactly, but settled. The way a man is settled when he has nothing left to prove and knows it. She had seen men come through Hatcher Flat with that look. They were usually the ones worth keeping. Tommy had appeared at her elbow without her hearing him come, the way boys do. He was looking up at the man on the horse with the frank, unsentimental appraisal that belongs only to children and horses. "Come in off the road, then. I will show you where things stand." His name was Cal Reeves. He had a last name he used plainly, and a first name he offered without ceremony, and that was all he offered on that first evening. He ate supper with them at the table, which was the bread from the windowsill and the last of the salt pork, and he ate what was put in front of him and said it was good. It is bread. Good bread, then, Tommy considered this. There is not much else. Cal looked at the boy with the same plain expression he had worn all evening. Then we had better find more. Nora watched that exchange from across the table and said nothing. She had not set out to hire anyone. She had put the notice up in the agency window in a moment of desperation that she had talked herself out of 3 times before doing it. Because hiring a stranger meant feeding a stranger, and feeding a stranger meant there was less for Tommy. But the fence along the north line was down in 4 places she had counted, and probably more she had not, and the well cover was rotting, and the barn roof had a gap over the east stall that she had patched twice with boards that were not the right size and would not survive a real snow. She could do many things. She had learned that about herself since March. She could fix a fence if someone showed her how to hold the wire. She could patch a roof with the wrong boards. She could make bread out of almost nothing and make it taste like something. But she could not do everything. And winter was coming down from the north with the particular indifference that Wyoming winters had, not caring who was ready. She showed Cal the barn that first evening because she believed in showing people what they were agreeing to before they agreed to it. The gap in the roof, the stall with the rotten post, the feed situation, which was not good. He walked through it without comment. He touched the post, tested it with his weight, and looked up at the gap in the roof. He looked at the hinge on the barn door that had been hanging wrong since August. This is a week of work if the weather holds. I know that. Do you have nails and timber? Some, not enough. He turned toward the north wall. I can get timber. There is a deadfall in the north draw. I saw it coming down the road. That is on Foss land. He looked at her. Archie Foss owns the land north and east of here. He has a standing claim on the timber, and he is not generous about it. Cal was quiet for a moment. Does he have a claim on deadfall that is already down? She did not answer that right away, because she did not know the answer, and because the question itself said something about how he thought. I would not want trouble with Foss. Not right now. Then I will find timber somewhere else. There is a way. He did not ask her what the trouble with Foss was. She had expected him to. But he simply filed the name somewhere in his attention and left it there, the way a man does when he is building an understanding of a place slowly and is not in a hurry. She went back to the house. Tommy was asleep on the small bed near the stove, one arm over the edge the way he always slept, like he was reaching for something even in his dreams. She sat at the table for a while in the quiet and tried to decide what she felt about Cal Reeves sleeping in her barn. She felt, more than anything, that the bread had been enough for 3, and that mattered more than it should. In the days that followed, Cal worked without instruction. This surprised her. She had expected to have to direct him, to make decisions about what came first and what could wait, to translate her knowledge of the place into orders that another person could carry out. Instead, she found that he looked at a thing and understood what it needed. The fence came first, because it had to. He fixed 4 sections in 2 days, using timber he had hauled from a stretch of dead pines on the creekside, which was not Foss land. The posts went in straight and deep. She walked the line after he was done and pulled on the wire in 3 places, and it held. The well cover was next. He built a new one from the same timber, fitted it with a leather hinge that he cut from a scrap of harness she had not known what to do with. It was a better cover than the original. Tommy followed him at a careful distance for the first 2 days, not speaking. On the 3rd day he said something and Cal answered, and after that they talked while they worked, Tommy asking questions in the particular relentless way of 8-year-old boys, and Cal answering each one with the same patient plainness he used for everything. She watched this from the kitchen window and did not examine what she felt about it. There was a lantern that hung from a hook in the kitchen, a tin one that had belonged to Leonard and then to her. She used it every evening to see by while she cooked, and she had used it so long that she had stopped noticing it was there. But Cal noticed it on the 2nd evening because the wick had burned down unevenly and was smoking, and without asking he trimmed it for her while she was getting water from the well. She came in, and the kitchen was a little brighter, and the smoke was gone, and he was washing his hands at the basin. She did not say anything. She set the water down. The wick was getting short. You will want to order more when you can. I know. Thank you, that was all. But she found herself noticing the lantern after that, the steadiness of its light, the way it threw the kitchen into a warm shadow. She noticed it 3 times. In the 2nd week, Archie Foss came. He came on a Tuesday afternoon, which was the kind of day where the sky could not decide between sun and cloud, and so did both badly. He came on a black horse with two men she did not recognize riding behind him. He came to the front of the house and did not dismount. Nora went to the door. Archie Foss was a large man in the specific way that men who have always had enough to eat are large. He had a good hat and a better coat and the expression of someone who was used to conversations going the way he intended them to. He was perhaps 50, with a neat gray beard and small, assessing eyes. "Mrs. Calloway, I have been meaning to speak with you." She stood in the doorway. "Mr. Foss." Foss looked past her at the yard. "I see you have taken on help." "I have. I was not aware the place was running to payroll. The help is not on payroll." He took that in. He said, "I have spoken with the bank, Mrs. Calloway. As you know, the deed situation on this land has some complexity to it. With Leonard gone and no clear succession, there are questions that need answers. I have spoken with the bank as well." Foss let a breath out through his nose. "Then you know that a claim can be made, not to distress you, only to say that there are interested parties, including myself. I have land running north and east, and it would make good sense to bring this parcel into it. This parcel has a house with a child in it. I understand that. I am not without feeling." He adjusted the reins across the pommel. "I would offer a fair price, enough to get you and the boys settled somewhere more suitable. This place is suitable." He looked at her for a long moment with the patience of a man who had learned that waiting was cheaper than arguing. "I would like you to think about it. There is no urgency yet. But the deed question will come to a head in the spring, and it would be better for everyone to have it settled before then." He touched his hat brim and turned the black horse around. His two men followed. She stood in the doorway until they were through the gate and onto the road. Then she went inside and sat down at the table. Cal came in a few minutes later. He did not ask what Foss had said. He went to the stove and put the kettle on, and then he sat down on the other side of the table and waited. "He wants the land." Cal set both hands flat on the table. "I know. He has a legal angle. The deed was in Leonard's name, and I have not been able to establish that it passes to me clearly. There is a process, but it costs money I do not have, and Foss knows it." "What does the bank say exactly?" "That the claim is uncertain, and that without a lawyer to make the succession argument, it is likely to be decided by the county in a way that favors a buyer." Cal was quiet for a moment. The kettle began to move. "Do you have the deed itself?" "Yes, I have everything Leonard kept. I have been through it all." "Is there any document with both your names?" "A purchase record, a tax bill, anything," she thought. "There is a letter from the man who sold Leonard the land back in '76. He wrote to both of them, to Leonard and Nora, because Leonard had told him they were newly married, and the man was from the South, and he believed in writing to the wife as well. It is just a letter. It mentions both names." Cal lifted his chin slightly. "That is something. It is just a letter. It is a document from before the deed dispute that places you as a named party in the transaction. That is not nothing in front of the right judge." She looked at him. "Are you a lawyer?" "No, but I have sat in on a county proceeding or two. Sitting in is not the same as knowing." "No, but I know someone in Casper who is. A man named Briggs. He did right by a family I knew up in Carbon County. He would look at the letter." "I cannot get to Casper. You do not need to. I can ride up and back in 3 days if the weather stays. I would take the letter and the deed and let Briggs tell us what we have." She watched him. He was looking at the table, not at her, in the way he often did when he said something that he thought might be refused. "Why would you do that?" He looked up. "Because the land is yours, and because Tommy is watching you fight for it every single day, and that is the kind of thing a boy should see his mother win." She did not say anything to that. There was nothing to say to it that would not undo her, and she had not come this far by undoing herself. She got up and poured the tea. He left for Casper on Thursday, before first light. She gave him the letter and the deed wrapped in oilcloth and a saddlebag with enough food for the ride. Tommy stood in the yard in the cold and watched him go without waving, the way Tommy watched most things, with the full serious attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. After the gray horse disappeared down the road, Tommy spoke without looking at her. "Is he coming back?" He said 3 days. "People say things." "Yes, they do." He looked at her then. "Do you think he will?" "I think he will." She was not entirely sure of it. She had not been sure of many things since March, and had learned to say what she believed, rather than what she knew, because believing was all she had some days. But she said it because she did believe it, in the particular quiet way she had come to believe things about Cal Reeves, not loudly, not with certainty, but with the steadiness of someone who had been watching a thing carefully and had not yet been wrong. She was right. He came back on the evening of the second day, which meant he had ridden harder than he needed to. He was at the kitchen table when she came in from the barn. A folded paper lay in front of him, different from the one she had sent with him. The oilcloth package sat beside it, intact. Briggs read everything. She sat down. The letter is enough, combined with the marriage record and the continuous habitation. Briggs says you have a strong succession argument. It is not certain, nothing is certain, but it is strong enough that a county judge is unlikely to rule against you if you file first. Filing costs money. Briggs will do it on deferred payment. He will take the fee in the spring, out of the first season. He has done it before for families in hard circumstances. He asked only that you write him back by the end of the month with your decision. She sat with that for a moment. The kitchen was warm. Outside the wind had picked up and she was aware of it only distantly, the way you are aware of cold when you are inside. Why would Briggs do that? Because I asked him to. Because I told him about you, and about Tommy, and about the ranch, and about what you have been doing here since March. He is a man who has a daughter. He understood what I was describing. What were you describing? He looked at her across the table. Someone who has not given up. She was quiet for a long time. Outside the wind was coming from the north, and the kitchen was warm, and it should have been still. But it was not still. She had forgotten, in the relief of hearing about Briggs and the letter and the filing, to put anything on for supper. There was a half loaf on the counter from that morning, the last of the bread from that week, and Tommy had come out of the back room at some point without her noticing and was standing near the counter now. Not touching it, just standing near it, the way he stood near things he wanted and had learned not to ask for. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the calm, patient eyes of a child who has gone hungry enough times to understand that wanting loudly does not help. "I will write to Briggs." He gave a single nod. Good. A moment passed. She cut the bread and set it on the table, and Tommy came and sat down without being told. And she stood there for a moment looking at the two of them, the boy and the man, one watching the bread and one not looking at it because he was too decent too, and something clarified in her that had been clouded for a long time. "Cal," he looked up. She murmured it, low and plain, more to herself than to him, the way a person states a truth they have been working up to for a while. "Come away from the barn tonight. Sleep inside. It is too cold now to be in the barn. I do not want to impose. We have no money." The words landed the way she meant them to, not as a complaint, not as an apology, as a fact, and as the only argument she needed, because a man who had ridden 2 days to Casper on a wage of room and board already knew what they had and had chosen to come anyway. And that meant something she did not have a word for yet, but intended to keep. "We have no money and the winter is coming, and you brought me something I could not have gotten myself. The barn is for the horse. Come inside." It was not the grandest thing that had been said in any kitchen in Wyoming in 1883. She knew that. But it was true, every word of it, and it was hers, and she had learned to value truth over grandeur. Tommy was still watching. Not the bread now. Cal sat still for a moment. Then he said, "All right." He said it plainly, the way he said most things, and got up and went out to see to the horse. She sat at the table for a few minutes after he was gone. Outside was the wind and the horse settling in the barn, and then the barn door closing and footsteps on the porch. The letter from Briggs was still on the table. She thought about Leonard, the way she sometimes did in the evenings. She thought about March and Tuesday and the horse they had found by the creek. She thought about everything she had carried since then. Then she got up and set another plate. Tommy came out of the doorway without being asked. He sat at the table and folded his hands and waited with the patience he had developed over a long, lean autumn. Cal came in and hung his coat on the hook and sat down. None of them said anything for a moment. There was not much to say. There was supper on the table, small but enough, and outside the cold had gone still. Tommy had been patient long enough. "Did you get more flour?" Cal looked at Nora. "I did. It is in the saddlebag. I thought we might want bread. Good bread, the best kind." She watched the two of them and felt something settle in her chest that had not been settled in a long time. Not fixed, not finished. Just settled, the way a house settles in the cold, finding its place, going still. She served the supper. That winter was hard, as Wyoming winters always were. But the barn roof held because the east stall post had been replaced and the gap had been properly sealed. The fence held. The well did not freeze because the new cover fit right and the insulation Cal had packed around the base kept the worst of the cold out. Briggs filed in November. The county took it up in January. Foss came back once, in December, to make what he called a final offer, and she met him at the gate this time, not the door, and told him plainly that the matter was with the court and she would not be discussing it further. He looked past her at the house and the barn and the clean repaired yard. "You have had help." "Yes," Foss tilted his head slightly. "That changes things, does it? It changes what I am able to do. What I intend has not changed." He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but recalculated. He turned the black horse and rode out. He did not come back. The county ruled in February. Briggs sent the letter, 3 pages in careful legal language that came down, at the end, to one simple thing. The deed was hers. The land was hers. The house was hers. She read it twice at the kitchen table. Then she got up and went to the window and looked at the road, the way she used to look at it, not waiting for anyone, not afraid of who might come down it, just looking at a road that now led out from land that belonged to her. Cal was in the barn. He had been rehanging the door since morning, a job that had been waiting since October. She could hear the sound of it, the patient knock of the mallet, the pause, the check, the mallet again. Tommy was at the table doing the numbers that Cal had been teaching him, basic things, counting and adding, and the occasional multiplication that Tommy found endlessly satisfying. He had a slate that they had ordered from the store in town, a small gray slate with a wooden frame, and he bent over it now with the concentration of someone for whom every mark mattered. Tommy looked up. "What are you looking at?" "You. Why?" "Because you are worth looking at." He considered this with the grave seriousness he brought to most things. Then he turned back to the slate. The barn door made a final, right sound, a clean swing on its hinge, solid and even. Then quiet. Cal came in a few minutes later. He looked at her standing at the window and then at the letter on the table and then at her again. She nodded. He sat down. He did not say anything immediately. He looked at the letter and then at his hands. He was a man who spoke when he had something worth saying and did not speak to fill space, which had taken her some time to understand and which she now understood entirely. "What do you want to do?" "Spring is coming. Plant, expand the garden. The south field has been fallow 2 years and it wants tending. Livestock, 2 more cattle if we can get them. I know a man in Cheyenne who owes Leonard an old debt. He might be willing to settle it in kind. And the summer. Work same as always." He was quiet. She could see him thinking, turning something over in that careful, patient way he had. I have been thinking about staying on. You have been staying on. He held her gaze. I mean to stay on properly. Past the spring, past the summer. Ongoing, she looked at him. He looked back at her, steadily, the way he did when he meant exactly what he said. On what terms? On the terms of being here, being useful, being part of this if you will have it. Tommy did not look up from the slate. But he had gone very still, the way he went still when he was listening to something that mattered. That is not a small thing to offer. No, it is not. I have not been easy to work for. You have been honest. That is easier in the end. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window the road was empty and the south field was flat under the last of the winter, and the road beyond it ran clear to the horizon. Then stay. All right. Neither of them moved for a moment. The words sat between them like something set down carefully on a table, not fragile, just placed with intention. Tommy set the chalk down on the slate. He looked up at her and then at Cal. Then he picked the chalk back up and returned to his numbers with the air of someone who had been waiting for a particular answer and had now received it. The lantern hung on its hook above them, burning clean. She had trimmed the wick herself that morning, because she knew how now, and the light it gave was steady and warm and reached all the way to the corners. That was what she thought about later, in the evenings, when the work was done and the fire was low and Tommy was asleep and the ranch was quiet around them. Not the deed or the letter from Briggs or the conversation at the gate with Foss. Not even the day Cal had come down the road on the gray horse and stopped at her gate. She thought about the light in the evenings, how it reached to the corners, how she had stopped being afraid of what was in them. What she had now was not what she had planned, back in the early years, back when planning had seemed like something the future would honor. It was smaller in some ways. A single ranch on a flat Wyoming plain, a barn with a repaired roof, a boy who was growing up knowing that hard things could be survived with patience and plain dealing, and the willingness to let someone else help carry what was too heavy to carry alone. But it was hers. Every board of it, every mended post, every trimmed wick and leveled doorsill, hers and held, and she intended to keep it.